Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped off the bus at Fort Harrison with her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The Georgia sun beat down on the dusty base, and sweat already dotted her forehead. She'd requested this transfer specifically. After 12 years in the Navy, she wanted something different, something quieter. The joint training facility seemed perfect. She was 34 years old, fit and capable, with short brown hair tucked under her cap. Her uniform was crisp despite the long journey. Sarah had learned long ago that appearance mattered in the military, especially for women who had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. The base was smaller than she expected. A cluster of administrative buildings surrounded a central parade ground. Beyond that, she could see the training fields and obstacle courses. Everything looked worn but functional, like it had seen better days but still got the job done. Sarah reported to the main office, where a clerk barely looked up from his computer as he processed her paperwork. "Barracks are Building 7, he said flatly. "Sergeant Davis will assign you a bunk. Orientation is tomorrow at 0600. "Thank you," Sarah replied, but the clerk had already turned back to his screen. Building 7 was a long, low structure that had been repainted so many times the layers were visible at the corners. Inside, the air was stale and hot. Sarah found Sergeant Davis in a small office near the entrance. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. "Lieutenant Mitchell reporting, sir," she said, standing at attention. Davis looked her up and down slowly, his expression somewhere between boredom and disdain. "Navy, huh? We don't get many of you here. Most of this base is Army now." "Yes, sir. I'm here for the Joint Operations Training Program." "Right," he tossed her a key. "Bunk 23, try not to cause problems. We run a tight ship here." He smirked at his own joke about Navy terminology. Sarah took the key without comment and found her assigned space. The barracks were co-ed by room assignment, with women housed in one wing and men in another. Her room held 6 bunks, 3 of which were already occupied. 2 women sat on lower bunks, playing cards. They glanced up when Sarah entered but didn't greet her. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Sarah introduced herself anyway, "just transferred in." The blonde woman shuffled the cards without looking up. "Corporal Jenkins, that's Private Reeves." She nodded toward a dark-haired woman on the other bunk. "Welcome to paradise," Reeves said with heavy sarcasm. Sarah unpacked her belongings, arranging them in the small locker beside her bunk. She kept her personal items to a minimum, a photo of her mother, a book, some toiletries. Everything else was military issue. "You coming from a ship?" Jenkins asked, her tone suggesting she already didn't like the answer. "Naval Station Norfolk," Sarah replied. "Operations office." Jenkins and Reeves exchanged looks. "A desk job," Reeves said, barely hiding her sneer. "That explains the soft hands." Sarah had heard it before, the implication that shore duty meant she wasn't a real sailor. She'd done 3 deployments before her current assignment, but explaining wouldn't change their minds. People believed what they wanted to believe. That evening, Sarah went to the mess hall for dinner. The room buzzed with conversation and the clatter of trays. She grabbed a plate of something that might have been meatloaf and looked for a place to sit. Most tables were full of people who clearly knew each other well. She spotted an empty seat at a table near the back and headed toward it. As she approached, a tall sergeant with sharp features and cold eyes looked up. His name tape read Morrison. "Seat's taken," he said flatly. Sarah glanced around. "I don't see anyone." "I said it's taken." Morrison's voice carried an edge that made several nearby conversations pause. Sarah felt the eyes on her. This was a test, she knew. Stand your ground or roll over. She met Morrison's stare evenly. "With respect, Sergeant, the mess hall is for all personnel. If someone joins you, I'll move." Morrison's jaw tightened. For a moment, Sarah thought he might escalate. Then he smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Suit yourself, Lieutenant." She sat down and ate her meal in silence, while Morrison and his 2 companions talked around her as if she didn't exist. Their conversation was pointed, references to real soldiers, and people who have actually seen combat, and desk jockeys who transfer here for an easy ride. Sarah kept her expression neutral and finished her dinner. When she stood to leave, Morrison's foot shot out, just barely in her path. She sidestepped it smoothly without looking down, without acknowledging the childish move. Behind her, she heard one of Morrison's friends laugh. Navy thinks they're so smart. Back in the barracks, Sarah lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. She'd faced hostility before, had proven herself countless times. This would be no different. Tomorrow she'd begin training, and she'd show them what she was made of. What Sarah didn't know was that Sergeant Morrison had a reputation on the base. He'd been there for 8 years and ran his own small circle of influence. He didn't like outsiders, especially officers who came from other branches, and he especially didn't like women who refused to back down. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, Morrison sat in the common room with 5 of his closest allies, nursing a beer he'd smuggled onto base. "We've got a problem," he told them. "New Navy lieutenant thinks she's going to fit right in. I think we need to show her how things really work around here." The next morning's orientation was routine. Sarah sat through briefings about base regulations, training schedules, and safety protocols. The commanding officer, Colonel Brennan, was a stern man in his early 60s who spoke with clipped precision. He welcomed the new transfers without much warmth and dismissed them to begin their assignments. Sarah's first week passed in a blur of physical training and classroom instruction. The Joint Operations Program was designed to improve cooperation between military branches, teaching officers from different backgrounds to work together. In theory, it was a good idea. In practice, old rivalries and prejudices ran deep. On the obstacle course, Sarah held her own. She wasn't the fastest, but she was far from the slowest. She completed every challenge, scaled every wall, crossed every rope bridge. Some of the other trainees seemed surprised. Morrison, who assisted with training duties, seemed annoyed. "Not bad for a desk jockey," he commented as Sarah finished a timed run through the course. "You do that on a ship." "We train too, Sergeant," Sarah replied evenly, catching her breath. "Sure you do." Morrison checked his stopwatch. "Maybe try a little harder next time. Wouldn't want the Navy to look weak." Sarah bit back her response. Engaging with him wasn't worth it. She moved to the back of the group and waited for the next exercise. But Morrison wasn't finished with her. Over the next few days, he found small ways to make her life difficult. He assigned her the worst duty shifts. He accidentally scheduled her for extra physical training while others got rest periods. He criticized her performance in front of groups, even when she'd done everything correctly. The other trainees noticed, and most chose to stay neutral. Nobody wanted to cross Morrison. A few, like Corporal Jenkins, seemed to enjoy watching someone else take the heat. Sarah endured it all without complaint. She'd outlasted worse. She focused on her work, kept her head down, and maintained her standards. If Morrison wanted to play petty games, let him. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. 2 weeks into her assignment, things escalated. Sarah was crossing the parade ground after evening training, heading back to the barracks. The sun had set, and the base was quiet except for distant voices from the recreation building. She was thinking about a shower and sleep when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Morrison and 2 other sergeants she recognized from the mess hall. Their names were Dixon and Kramer, both built like linebackers with mean eyes and smug expressions. "Evening, Lieutenant," Morrison said, his tone mocking. "Taking a stroll." "Just heading back to the barracks, Sergeant." Sarah kept her voice neutral, but her instincts were screaming. 3 men, no witnesses, and hostile intent written all over them. "See, that's the thing," Morrison stepped closer. "Some of us have been talking. We don't think you belong here. You Navy types, you come to our base, use our facilities, and act like you own the place." "I'm here on official orders," Sarah replied. "Same as everyone else." Dixon laughed. "Official orders, listen to her. Talking like she's somebody important." Sarah's heart rate picked up. She assessed her options. The barracks were 50 yards away. The main road had occasional vehicle traffic. If she ran, they'd probably catch her. If she fought, it was 3 against 1, and they outweighed her significantly. "I don't want trouble," she said firmly. I suggest you all return to your duties. You suggest, Crump moved to her left, cutting off that escape route. That's real cute, Lieutenant, but you're not in charge here. Mura-san was now directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the beer on his breath. They'd been drinking, which made them more dangerous and more stupid. Here's what's going to happen, Mura-san said quietly. You're going to request a transfer. Tomorrow morning. Tell them this base isn't a good fit. Pack your bags and go back to your nice, safe Navy office. Because if you stay, every single day is going to be worse than the last. Sarah stood her ground. No. Mura-san's expression darkened. What did you say? I said no. I'm not transferring because you're too insecure to work with someone from another branch. And I'm not intimidated by bullies who gang up on people when they can't win fair fights. It was the wrong thing to say, but also the right thing. Sarah was tired of backing down, tired of playing it safe. If they were going to push, she'd push back. Mura-san's hand shot out and grabbed her uniform collar. You've got a smart mouth, Lieutenant. Maybe somebody needs to teach you some respect. Sarah reacted on instinct. She grabbed Mura-san's wrist with both hands and twisted sharply, using his momentum against him. In the Navy's self-defense training, they drilled these moves until they were muscle memory. Mura-san grunted in surprise and pain, stumbling sideways. But Duck-san and Krumke moved in immediately. Duck-san shoved Sarah hard from behind, sending her forward. She tried to catch herself, but Krumke's fist came out of nowhere, catching her across the left cheekbone with brutal force. Pain exploded through Sarah's face. She went down hard, tasting blood. The world tilted and blurred. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Mura-san's voice, angry and rough. Nobody hits me and gets away with it. You should have transferred when you had the chance. Sarah tried to get up, but a boot caught her in the ribs. She curled instinctively, protecting her vital organs. Another kick, this one to her back. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Then she heard a voice, sharp and commanding. What the hell is going on here? The beating stopped abruptly. Sarah gasped for air, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw a figure approaching, another officer, a captain she didn't recognize. Sir, Mura-san's voice had changed completely, now full of false respect. The lieutenant fell during training. We were just helping her up. Sarah wanted to protest, to tell the truth, but her mouth wasn't working right. Blood ran down her chin from a split lip. Her cheekbone throbbed with every heartbeat. The captain looked skeptical. That's so, Lieutenant, you fall. Sarah met his eyes. She saw the calculation there, believe her and start an investigation, or accept Mura-san's lie and avoid complications. She'd seen that look before. Some people just wanted problems to go away quietly. Before she could answer, Mura-san added, She'd been drinking, sir. We all saw it. Got disoriented on the way back from town. It was a complete lie, and they all knew it, but it gave the captain an easy out. Sarah felt something inside her harden. She pushed herself up to sitting, ignoring the pain screaming through her body. Yes, sir, she said clearly, her split lip making the words difficult. I fell. The captain nodded, relief obvious on his face. You should report to the infirmary, Lieutenant. Get that looked at, and maybe watch your step next time. He left quickly, not wanting to know more. Mura-san and his friends waited until the captain was gone, then Mura-san leaned down close to Sarah's ear. Smart choice, he whispered. Now get off this base before something worse happens. They walked away, laughing among themselves. Sarah sat alone on the ground, bleeding and bruised, and felt the full weight of injustice settle on her shoulders. This was how it worked. This was how people like Mura-san got away with everything, because reporting meant investigations, complications, career damage for everyone involved. Easier to keep quiet, easier to let it go. But as Sarah finally pulled herself to her feet, she made a decision. She wasn't going anywhere. Part 3, Silent Strength. Sarah limped to the infirmary, where a tired-looking medic examined her injuries. The split lip would heal on its own. The bruised ribs were painful but not broken. The real damage was to her left cheekbone, which had swollen to the point that her eye was starting to close. What happened? the medic asked as he applied an ice pack. Training accident, Sarah replied. The lie tasted bitter, but she wasn't ready to fight that battle yet. Not here, not now. The medic didn't press. He'd probably heard similar stories before. He gave her pain medication and instructions to return if the swelling didn't go down. Then he sent her back to the barracks. Walking back, every step hurt. Her ribs protested with each breath. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the anger burning in her chest. Murasun had assaulted her. Duckson and Krumke had helped. And a captain had chosen to look the other way. In the barracks, Junkins and Reeves were still awake. They took one look at Sarah's face and went silent. Don't ask, Sarah said before either could speak. She climbed carefully onto her bunk and lay on her side, the ice pack pressed to her face. In the darkness, she heard Junkins whisper, Murasun. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. You should report it, Reeves said quietly. That's assault. And who's going to believe me? Sarah whispered back. 3 enlisted against 1 officer. They'll say I started it, or I was drunk, or I'm making it up because I can't handle the pressure. Neither woman argued. They knew she was right. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, thinking about her options. She could request a transfer, leave quietly like Murasun wanted. She could file a formal complaint, knowing it would probably go nowhere and make her a target for retaliation. Or she could stay, endure, and wait for an opportunity to prove herself. The problem was, she didn't know what that opportunity might look like. The next morning, Sarah reported for training despite her injuries. Murasun's eyebrows rose when he saw her, surprise and irritation crossing his face. He'd expected her to quit or hide. Lieutenant Mitchell, he said with false concern. Heard you had an accident. Maybe you should take the day off, recover. I'm fine, Sergeant, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her jaw. She participated in every exercise, even when her ribs screamed in protest. She ran the obstacle course. She completed the tactical drills. Other trainees stared at her bruised face, but nobody said anything. The message was clear. This is what happens when you cross Murasun. Over the next week, Sarah developed a routine. She trained hard, kept to herself, and avoided situations where she might be alone with Murasun and his group. She ate quickly in the mess hall and walked back to the barracks with other people. At night, she studied the base regulations and training manuals, looking for any advantage she could find. The bruising on her face faded from purple to yellow-green. Her ribs healed slowly, but something else was changing too. Other soldiers started watching her differently, not with friendship exactly, but with a kind of wary respect. She'd taken a beating and come back. That meant something in military culture. One evening, as Sarah was leaving the training field, a young private approached her nervously. His name was Chun, and he couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Ma'am, he said quietly, I just wanted to say, what you're doing staying here after what happened, that takes guts. Sarah was surprised. You know what happened. Chun glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. Everyone knows Murasun jumped you. Most people are too scared to say anything. He's got friends in the administrative office, even some officers who look the other way. But it's not right, what he did. Thank you, Private, Sarah said, but I can handle Murasun. Chun nodded and hurried away, but the conversation stayed with Sarah. Murasun had power on this base, the kind that came from years of building alliances and intimidating anyone who challenged him. Taking him down wouldn't be easy. 2 days later, Sarah got her first real opportunity. She was assigned to supervise a night navigation exercise, a routine training where groups of soldiers used maps and compasses to find checkpoints in the dark. Morrison was also assigned to the exercise as a safety observer. Sarah saw him watching her throughout the evening, his expression calculating. She knew he was looking for a chance to catch her making a mistake, something he could use against her. The exercise was going smoothly until one group of trainees got lost. Sarah tracked their radio transmissions and realized they'd taken a wrong turn and were headed toward a restricted area used for live-fire exercises. It wasn't currently active, but the area was off-limits and potentially dangerous. She radioed them immediately. Alpha Team, this is Lieutenant Mitchell. You're off course. Stop where you are and check your position. The team leader, a corporal named Hayes, sounded confused. Ma'am, our map shows we're on the right path. Negative. You're heading into a restricted zone. Reverse course and return to checkpoint 3. There was a pause. Then Morrison's voice came over the radio. Alpha Team, this is Sergeant Morrison. Disregard that last order. Your map is correct. Continue on your current heading. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Morrison was deliberately sending them the wrong way, setting her up to look incompetent when she had to call off the exercise to retrieve them. She keyed her radio again. Alpha Team, this is Lieutenant Mitchell. Sergeant Morrison is incorrect. You are to stop immediately and await further instructions. That is a direct order. Sergeant Morrison is our assigned supervisor, ma'am, Hayes replied, clearly uncomfortable being caught between conflicting orders. Morrison appeared beside Sarah in the command tent, his smile nasty. Having trouble controlling your exercise, Lieutenant? Maybe you should let the experienced NCOs handle this. Sarah ignored him and grabbed the field phone, calling the base operations center. This is Lieutenant Mitchell supervising night navigation training. I need confirmation that Sector 7 is restricted and off-limits to training exercises. The operations officer confirmed it immediately. Affirmative, Lieutenant. That area is absolutely restricted. If you have personnel heading that way, redirect them now. Sarah hung up and radioed Alpha Team with renewed authority. Alpha Team, base operations confirms Sector 7 is restricted. You will reverse course immediately. Sergeant Morrison gave you incorrect information. This time, Hayes complied. Yes, ma'am, revering course now. Morrison's face darkened with anger. You just undermined me in front of trainees, Lieutenant. That's insubordination. You gave them dangerous information, Sergeant. Either you don't know the base restrictions, which makes you incompetent, or you knew and gave the wrong order anyway, which makes you reckless. Either way, you're done supervising this exercise. Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You're making a big mistake. I tried to give you an easy way out, but now I'm going to make sure you regret ever coming to this base. Sarah stood her ground. Do your worst, Sergeant. I'm not going anywhere. He left the command tent, his footsteps heavy with rage. Sarah finished the exercise without further incident, but she knew this wasn't over. Morrison wouldn't let this humiliation stand. She was right. The next day, Sarah was called to Colonel Brennan's office. She stood at attention while the colonel read from a formal complaint. Morrison had written her up for multiple infractions, disrespect to a non-commissioned officer, poor judgment during training exercises, and conduct unbecoming an officer. These are serious charges, Lieutenant, Brennan said, his tone disapproving. Sergeant Morrison has been on this base for 8 years with an exemplary record. You've been here less than a month. What do you have to say for yourself? Sarah chose her words carefully. Sir, I followed proper protocols during the navigation exercise. I prevented trainees from entering a restricted area. Sergeant Morrison gave incorrect orders, and I corrected them. Everything else in his complaint is false. Brennan looked skeptical. You're saying a decorated sergeant is lying. I'm saying his version of events is inaccurate, sir. The colonel sighed. Look, Lieutenant, I'm going to be straight with you. You've made some waves since arriving here. Maybe the Navy does things differently, but here we value teamwork and respect for the chain of command. I'm putting a formal counseling statement in your file. One more incident, and I'll have grounds to recommend your transfer or separation from the program. Sarah felt the injustice like a physical blow. Yes, sir. As she left the colonel's office, she passed Morrison in the hallway. He smirked at her, confident in his victory. Sarah kept walking, her expression carefully neutral. But inside, she was planning. Morrison had powerful friends, but he'd also made a mistake. He'd underestimated her willingness to fight back. And Sarah had learned long ago that the best victories come to those who are patient, who watch and wait for the right moment. The formal counseling statement changed things on the base. Word spread quickly that Lieutenant Mitchell had been written up, that Colonel Brennan had essentially sided with Morrison. Some soldiers who had been warming up to Sarah became distant again. Others, Morrison's allies, grew bolder in their harassment. Sarah found her belongings accidentally knocked over in the barracks. Her training assignments were changed at the last minute, forcing her to scramble. Someone started a rumor that she'd failed her physical fitness test, a complete lie, but one that spread anyway. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure. She documented everything in a private journal, noting dates, times, and witnesses. She didn't know if she'd ever need it, but she believed in being prepared. 3 weeks after the counseling statement, Sarah was assigned to lead a field training exercise focused on emergency medical response. It was a complex scenario involving multiple casualty simulations, and success required precise coordination between teams. Morrison wasn't officially part of the exercise, but he showed up anyway, claiming he was there to observe and provide feedback. Sarah couldn't refuse him without causing another incident. The exercise began smoothly. Teams responded to simulated injuries, practicing triage and evacuation procedures. Sarah coordinated from the command post, tracking each unit's progress and providing guidance over the radio. Then one of the trainees, Private Chen, the same young man who had spoken to Sarah weeks earlier, collapsed during a scenario. At first, everyone thought it was part of the simulation. But when Chen didn't respond to the safety word, his teammates realized something was genuinely wrong. "Command, this is Bravo Team." The voice on the radio was panicked. "We have a real medical emergency. Private Chen is unconscious and not breathing." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. "Bravo Team, begin CPR. I'm sending the medic team to your location now. What's your exact position?" While the team leader stammered out coordinates, Sarah was already on the field phone calling for real emergency medical services. She dispatched the exercise medics, grabbed the nearest medical kit, and ran toward Chen's location herself. Morrison stepped in front of her. "Lieutenant, you need to stay at the command post. Let the medics handle it." "Get out of my way, Sergeant," Sarah said coldly. "That's an order, Lieutenant. You're not thinking clearly." Sarah didn't have time for this. She pushed past Morrison and sprinted across the training field. Behind her, she heard him shouting something about insubordination, but she didn't care. A soldier's life was at stake. She reached Chen's position to find his teammates performing chest compressions. The young private's lips were blue, his face gray. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him and assessed the situation quickly. No pulse, no breathing, possible cardiac arrest. "Keep compressions going," she ordered. "Count out loud, push hard and fast." The exercise medics arrived with an automated external defibrillator. Sarah helped apply the pads to Chen's chest while the device analyzed his heart rhythm. The AED instructed them to deliver a shock. Chen's body jerked, but there was still no pulse. They continued CPR, alternating between chest compressions and rescue breaths. Sarah lost track of time, focused entirely on saving this young man's life. Around them, other trainees had gathered, watching in shocked silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chen gasped and coughed. His eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. The medics immediately provided oxygen and prepared him for transport. "You're okay," Sarah told him, squeezing his hand. "You're going to be okay. Help is here." An ambulance arrived minutes later, and Chen was loaded onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him away, he looked at Sarah with gratitude and fear mixed in his young eyes. Sarah stood up slowly, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fatting. She realized her uniform was covered in dirt and grass stains, her knees scraped from kneeling on rough ground. Morrison appeared beside her, his face red with anger. "You abandoned your command post, disobeyed a direct order, and disrupted the entire training exercise. This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior I've been documenting." Sarah turned to face him, too exhausted to care about his threats anymore. "I saved a soldier's life, Sergeant. If you have a problem with that, put it in your report." "Oh, I will. And this time, Lieutenant, you're finished." The gathered trainees heard every word. Some looked uncomfortable, others angry, but nobody spoke up. Fear of Morrison still ran deep. Sarah walked back to the command post to officially end the exercise and complete the required incident reports. Her hands were still shaking as she wrote. She'd done the right thing, she knew that absolutely. But Morrison would twist it, make it look like dereliction of duty or worse. That evening, Sarah was again summoned to Colonel Brennan's office. Morrison was already there, along with another officer she didn't recognize, a major with a stern expression and ramrod-straight posture. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Brennan began, "Sergeant Morrison has filed another complaint. This one is even more serious. He claims you abandoned your command post during a training exercise, disobeyed a direct order, and created a dangerous situation." "Sir, with respect, that's not what happened. Private Chen had a medical emergency, a real one, not part of the exercise. I responded appropriately to save his life." Morrison interrupted. "You panicked and ran off without securing the command post or following proper protocols. Other soldiers could have handled the medical emergency while you maintained command and control." Sarah fought to keep her voice level. "A soldier was dying. I was the closest person with advanced medical training. Every second counted." "That's a matter of opinion," Brennan said. "Sergeant Morrison believes you should have delegated and maintained your command responsibilities." The major spoke for the first time, his voice clipped and cold. "Lieutenant, your time at this facility has been marked by conflict and questionable decisions. Perhaps you're simply not suited for this assignment." Sarah felt something break inside her. She'd endured harassment, assault, false accusations, and institutional betrayal. She'd kept her head down, played by the rules, and tried to do everything right, and none of it had mattered. "Then what would you have me do, sir?" she asked quietly. "Transfer quietly, pretend none of this happened. Let men like Morrison run this base through intimidation and violence." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "That's quite an accusation, Lieutenant. Do you have proof of any violence?" Sarah touched her cheekbone, where the bruise had finally faded completely. "I have my medical records from the assault 3 weeks ago. The one where Morrison and 2 others beat me unconscious, and a captain witnessed the aftermath but chose to look the other way." The room went silent. Morrison's face paled slightly, then flushed with anger. "That's a complete fabrication. She fell during training. Everyone knows she'd been drinking." "I hadn't touched alcohol," Sarah said firmly. "I was assaulted, and I can prove it." She was bluffing. She had no proof beyond her own word and the medical report, which hadn't documented the cause of her injuries. But she was tired of being quiet, tired of protecting men who didn't deserve it. Brennan stood up, his expression hardening. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you are making very serious allegations. Unless you can provide concrete evidence, I suggest you reconsider your accusations." "I want a formal investigation," Sarah said. "Into Morrison's conduct, into the assault, into the systemic harassment of transfer personnel on this base." The major shook his head. "Lieutenant, you're in no position to make demands. Based on the incidents documented in your file, I'm recommending your immediate suspension from the training program pending a review board." It was over. Sarah knew it. They were going to force her out, and Morrison would walk away unpunished. She'd fought as hard as she could, and it hadn't been enough. "Is that all, sir?" she asked quietly. "You're dismissed," Brennan said. "Confine yourself to barracks until further notice." Sarah saluted mechanically and left the office. In the hallway, Morrison caught up with her, his voice low and triumphant. "Told you I'd make you regret it," he hissed. "Should have left when you had the chance." Sarah kept walking, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. But inside, she was already planning her next move. If they wanted her off this base, fine. But she wasn't going quietly, and she wasn't going alone. That night, Sarah sat in the barracks and made a phone call she'd been avoiding for years. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Admiral James Mitchell had spent 35 years in the Navy. He'd commanded carrier strike groups, advised presidents, and earned 3 stars through a combination of brilliant tactical thinking and unwavering integrity. He was one of the most respected officers in the United States military. He was also Sarah's father, though few people knew it. Sarah had deliberately kept her family connection private throughout her career. She'd used her mother's maiden name on some documents, avoided mentioning her father's rank, and requested assignments where their paths wouldn't cross. She wanted to succeed on her own merit, not ride on his reputation. But now, sitting in the barracks with her career in ruins, Sarah told him everything. The transfer to Fort Harrison, Morrison's harassment, the assault, the institutional betrayal, the false accusations, all of it. Admiral Mitchell listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" he finally asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Because I wanted to handle it myself. Because I didn't want anyone thinking I got special treatment. Because," Sarah's voice broke, "because I wanted to prove I could do this without you." "Sarah," her father said gently, "asking for help isn't weakness. It's knowing when the fight is bigger than one person can handle alone. And what you've described, that's not just harassment. That's assault, institutional corruption, and a command climate that tolerates abuse." "They're going to force me out, Dad. The review board is a formality. They've already decided." "Not if I have anything to say about it," the Admiral replied. "I'm going to make some calls. In the meantime, document everything you can remember. Names, dates, witnesses, incidents, everything." "Dad, I don't want you to damage your reputation over this." Admiral Mitchell's laugh was sharp. "Sarah, if the Navy I've served for 3 decades allows officers to be assaulted and then punished for reporting it, then it's not the Navy I thought I knew. And it needs to change. Give me 2 days." He hung up. Sarah sat holding the phone, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. She'd broken her own rule about independence, but maybe her father was right. Maybe some fights needed reinforcements. The next day, Sarah remained in the barracks as ordered. Other soldiers gave her a wide berth, knowing she was in trouble but not knowing the details. Only Jenkins and Reeves treated her normally, and even they were careful about what they said. "For what it's worth," Jenkins said quietly that evening, "I think Morrison's a snake, always have, but nobody's ever been able to touch him." "Maybe somebody finally will," Sarah replied. She didn't explain. She didn't want to jinx whatever her father was planning. The following morning, at precisely 0800 hours, 3 helicopters landed on Fort Harrison's parade ground. This was unusual enough to draw attention from across the base. Soldiers stopped what they were doing to watch as the helicopters disgorged their passengers. From the first helicopter stepped Admiral James Mitchell in his dress whites, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders. From the second came General Patricia Rodriguez, Army 3-star, and head of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. From the third emerged General Marcus Webb, 3-star, and the commanding general overseeing all joint training facilities in the southeastern United States. The base command scrambled. Colonel Brennan practically ran from his office to greet them, his face pale with shock and fear. He hadn't been informed of this visit. Nobody had. "Admiral Mitchell, General Rodriguez, General Webb," Brennan stammered. "This is unexpected. If you'd notified us of your visit, we would have prepared proper." "This isn't a social call, Colonel," Admiral Mitchell interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We're here to conduct an immediate investigation into allegations of assault, harassment, and command negligence at this facility." Word spread across the base like wildfire. Soldiers whispered to each other, trying to understand what was happening. Sergeant Morrison, in the middle of a training exercise, heard the news and felt ice form in his stomach. In the barracks, a runner appeared at Sarah's door. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you're to report to the command center immediately." Sarah dressed quickly in her service uniform and made her way to the administrative building. The scene outside was controlled chaos, officers rushing around, soldiers standing at rigid attention as the 3 generals and 1 admiral moved through the facility. Inside the conference room, Sarah found her father standing with Generals Rodriguez and Webb. Colonel Brennan was there too, looking like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Admiral Mitchell's expression softened slightly when he saw Sarah's face. The bruising was gone, but he was seeing her for the first time since the assault, and his jaw tightened with barely controlled fury. General Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, spoke first. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I'm General Rodriguez with the Army CID. We're here to investigate your allegations. I need you to provide a complete statement, including all incidents of harassment, the assault on," she checked her notes, "the evening of November 3rd, and any subsequent retaliation or misconduct you've witnessed." For the next 3 hours, Sarah told her story again. This time, she held nothing back. She named names, provided dates, described Morrison's network of allies and the institutional climate that protected him. General Webb took notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Where is Sergeant Morrison now?" Webb asked Colonel Brennan. "On the training field, sir. Should I have him confined to quarters immediately, along with Sergeants Dixon and Kramer. They are not to communicate with each other or with any other personnel until we've completed interviews. Any attempt to tamper with witnesses or evidence will result in immediate court-martial." Brennan scrambled to comply. Within an hour, Morrison and his 2 accomplices were under guard in separate buildings, their computer access revoked, their phones confiscated. General Rodriguez interviewed dozens of soldiers over the next 2 days. Without Morrison's intimidating presence, people started talking. Private Chen confirmed that Sarah had saved his life. Other trainees admitted they'd witnessed harassment. A few soldiers, including Jenkins and Reeves, described the toxic culture Morrison had created. The captain who had witnessed Sarah's assault was interviewed for 4 hours. Under pressure from a 3-star general, he finally admitted he'd suspected the training accident story was false, but had chosen not to investigate because it seemed easier. Most damning of all, investigators discovered that Morrison had filed 14 official complaints against various soldiers over the past 3 years, all of them women or transfer personnel from other branches. Every single one had either transferred out or been forced to leave the service. Sarah was just the latest in a long pattern. On the 3rd day, General Webb called a formation of all base personnel. Soldiers stood in perfect ranks on the parade ground, while the general addressed them from a raised platform. "Over the past 72 hours, Webb began, his voice carrying across the field, "we have conducted an investigation into serious allegations of misconduct at this facility. What we found was a systematic failure of leadership and a toxic command climate that tolerated harassment, assault, and abuse." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Sergeant Morrison, Sergeant Dixon, and Sergeant Kramer have been formally charged with assault, conspiracy, and conduct unbecoming. They will face court-martial. Captain Daniels has been relieved of duty for failure to report a suspected crime." Gasps rippled through the formation. Morrison had seemed untouchable for so long that many soldiers could hardly believe he was actually being held accountable. Webb continued. "Colonel Brennan has been relieved as base commander effective immediately for failure to maintain proper command oversight and for creating an environment where such misconduct could flourish. I will be assuming direct command until a replacement is appointed." Brennan stood to the side, his face ashen. His career was over, and everyone knew it. "Furthermore," Webb said, "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell has been completely exonerated of all charges in her record. The formal counseling statements and complaints filed against her were based on false information and will be expunged. Lieutenant Mitchell showed exceptional courage in coming forward and in saving the life of Private Chen. She is being recommended for a commendation." Sarah stood in formation with the other officers, trying to process everything. It felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life. After the formation was dismissed, Admiral Mitchell approached his daughter. For a moment, the 3-star Admiral disappeared, and he was just a father looking at his injured child. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not just for fighting back, but for knowing when to ask for help. That takes courage, too." Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes but blinked them back. "Thank you for coming, Dad, for all of this. Thank General Rodriguez and General Webb, too. They could have ignored this, buried it in paperwork, but they believe in doing what's right, even when it's difficult. He paused. Will you stay in the program? Webb will understand if you want to transfer. Sarah looked around the base, at the soldiers who were watching her with new respect, at the training facilities where she'd endured so much. I think I'll stay, she said. Somebody needs to make sure the culture here actually changes. Her father smiled. That's my girl. Over the following weeks, Fort Harrison underwent a transformation. General Webb implemented new policies for reporting harassment and assault. He brought in counselors and trainers to address toxic masculinity and inter-service rivalry. He made it clear that retaliation against witnesses or victims would result in immediate prosecution. Morrison, Dixon, and Kramer were court-martialed and sentenced to military prison. Their dishonorable discharges ended their careers in disgrace. Captain Daniels was also discharged for failing in his duty to protect soldiers under his command. Sarah completed the Joint Operations Training Program at the top of her class. More than that, she became a symbol of change on the base, proof that speaking up could matter, that justice could prevail, even against long odds. Private Chen recovered fully from his cardiac event and returned to duty. He sought Sarah out to thank her personally for saving his life. I heard what you went through here, ma'am, he said, and I want you to know that you saved more than just my life. You saved this whole base from rotting from the inside. 6 months after the investigation, Sarah received orders for her next assignment, a posting to the Pentagon, working in the Admiral's office on personnel policy. It was her father's doing, she suspected, though he denied it when she asked. You earned that position, he insisted. The Navy needs officers who understand what it means to fight for what's right, even when everyone else wants to look away. Especially in policy-making roles where we can prevent these situations from happening in the first place. On her last day at Fort Harrison, Sarah stood on the parade ground where she'd first arrived months earlier. The base looked the same, but everything was different. Soldiers greeted her with genuine respect as they passed. The toxic atmosphere had lifted, replaced by something healthier, though still imperfect. General Webb appeared beside her, hands clasped behind his back. You did a good thing here, Lieutenant. Not just by reporting what happened to you, but by refusing to quit when everyone expected you to. That's leadership. Thank you, sir. I just did what had to be done. That's exactly what leadership is, Webb replied. Doing what has to be done, even when it's hard, even when you're afraid, even when you're standing alone. Remember that when you get to Washington. The battles there are different, but the principles are the same. As Sarah packed her belongings that evening, Jenkins and Reeves helped her carry boxes to the waiting transport. You know, Jenkins said, I'm sorry I was such a jerk when you first got here. I'd bought into Morrison's whole thing about outsiders and Navy transfers. I was wrong. We all were, Reeves added. But you showed us what it looks like to actually have a backbone. Half the women on this base are signing up for self-defense classes now. Things are changing because of you. Sarah smiled. Things are changing because people decided to change them. I just started the conversation. She climbed into the transport and watched Fort Harrison disappear behind her. She'd come to the base looking for something quieter, something easier. Instead, she'd found one of the hardest fights of her life. But she'd also discovered something important. Her own strength, yes, but also the power of truth. Morrison had built his empire on fear and silence. The moment people started talking, telling the truth about what they'd witnessed and experienced, his empire crumbled. Sarah understood now that her father's intervention hadn't been special treatment. It had been the removal of barriers that never should have existed in the first place. Justice shouldn't require a 3-star admiral to make phone calls. But until the system changed, people like her father, General Rodriguez, and General Webb would keep fighting to make it better. As the transport carried her toward her new assignment, Sarah thought about all the soldiers who hadn't been as fortunate as her, who'd left the service broken and defeated because they didn't have an admiral for a father. She thought about the ones who never reported what happened to them because they knew the system would fail them. And she made a promise to herself. She would use her new position to change things. She would fight for policies that protected victims and punished perpetrators. She would work to create a military culture where speaking up was praised instead of punished. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more Morrisons, more systems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. But Sarah had learned she was strong enough to fight those battles.